Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Republican strategist and former state communications director for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Brittany Martinez. Brittany, thanks so much for coming on once again.
Thanks for having me back.
I want to talk about where we are right now. We are exactly 5 weeks out from Election Day. It's also a big night, the first and potentially only vice presidential debate between Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. What are you looking out for tonight?
Yeah, first of all, I can't believe we're only 5 weeks out because we talk about presidential elections 2 years in advance. And so the fact that we're right here in the home stretch is so crazy to me. I think tonight's going to be really interesting. As we were getting, prepared with the shot and all of that, I think it's going to be a little bit of a dumpster fire. I'm going to be honest with you, only because, I think that we have two gentlemen who will be up on that stage who have big personalities that will probably butt heads a little bit. And I think tonight, more than anything, it's sort of going to be who do Americans like the most, personality-wise. I don't think we're going to get into very heavy policy debates. I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be who do you want to have a beer with, right? That old adage. But instead of talking about the president, we're talking about a vice presidential candidate.
So let's talk about that a little bit because it does appear in the polls that J.D. Vance has a little bit of that likability problem. And if it is a dumpster fire tonight, how does he get past that? Because polls are indicating when it comes to approval ratings between Vance and Walz, Walz is winning by double digits. So what does Vance need to do to appear more likable, to appear to be that guy who Americans of all stripes can have a beer with?
When I think of J.D. Vance, and he hasn't been in office all that long, is something that we have to remember. When I think of him, though, I think of someone who is, a strong defender of Trump and is very stern and firm with the way that he talks. That's not a bad thing. And listen, I'm not a supporter of Trump, so I'm going to have disagreements with him when it comes to those policy issues. However, that doesn't mean that you're unable to deliver it in a way that's digestible for the American people or that they can tolerate, right? And so I think what he has to do, and maybe this sounds kind of crazy, is be nice. He doesn't have to be gentle, but just he has to keep in mind the reputation that he's garnered during this campaign is not a great one. So he really, I think, has to be a little bit softer. And when we talk about presidents or vice presidents, that's not really a term that we use all that much. But when he's against Walz, who is America's dad, that he's being framed as a football coach, and he is able to come across as someone who is tough but also likable, he's got to try to tap into something like that, I think.
I think nice and modern politics is something that really we haven't seen in a while, and that would be nice to see. It would be nice to see on the national stage. But as we know, this race is neck and neck, especially in the battleground states. It's really anyone's race, and every demographic matters. As we know, women are a huge constituency, and J.D. Vance has seemed to say some comments that have riled women as a whole up. I mean, the childless cat lady's comment really is now a rallying cry of the left. How do you think he appeals to women tonight?
By not repeating that and maybe apologizing, or and there's also a thing, and maybe we've talked about this before, but there's just a problem in general in society, but also especially in politics, that people don't apologize. They just try to sweep it under the rug and hope it'll be the only a 24-hour story, and then we'll move on to the next. But this is something that has sustained a little bit, and so it's obviously going to be brought up in some capacity. I think it would be smart for him to say, listen, I was being crass, I was trying to be funny, no, I don't think women who are childless and have cats do not have a place in our culture, and just chalk it up, because I'm sure he didn't mean it to be cruel. I'm sure he was trying to be funny about it, and sometimes we say things that are a little off color, and then we just have to be able to own up to it. I think that would be a big character defining moment, that he can cop up to it and say, you know what, I was wrong and I didn't mean it like that, I'm sorry. Will he do that? No, probably not. He'll probably double down, if anything, which would be the worst thing he could do.
Well, when it comes to certain issues, Trump and Vance have the lead when it comes to immigration, the economy, inflation. When it comes to abortion, however, Democrats really have that on lock. Do you think he could make any strides tonight, J.D. Vance, when it comes to abortion, when it comes to women's rights?
You know what? I really don't think so. And I say that because when we saw the presidential debate, that was a topic that was brought up. And it's specifically what JD Vance had said about Trump. And Trump, even in that moment, was like, oh, well, he and I haven't even talked about it. You know, he's not speaking for me on this issue, which is such a slap in the face to your running mate, one. But also, it just gives no confidence that, hey, you know what, they're like on the same page on these really important issues. So I mean, I guess never say never. Like, potentially there's some space there, right, for people who are like, oh, this is the one issue that I care about the most, and maybe he can deliver an answer that's decent enough. But I really think they need to be pulling talking points from Nikki Haley when she was in this primary. I think she's the Republican who's been the best messenger on this issue. I think it's too little too late on this issue specifically, but women aren't single issue voters. So, you know, I'm sure economy, immigration, all those sorts of things will sway the needle as well.
What's really interesting is 3 months ago, Governor Walz was not talked about on the national stage. He wasn't part of the national discourse. Something that really put him on the map and really launched his vice presidential career now, or vice presidential candidacy rather, is that he called Republicans weird. He said, hey, that's really weird. JD Vance is weird. Trump is weird. And that really stuck, more so even than Democrats, label of Republicans are a threat to democracy. If JD Vance is called weird by Walz on the stage tonight, what's the response as a Republican?
I think that has been one of the most incredible messaging tactics of this race. It's been so smart, and you're right, it has stuck more so than some of the other things. Republicans, I don't think, have done the best job of trying to counteract that, because they'll be like, they call us weird, well, they're weird. But like, when you're saying that, you're admitting that you've been called weird, so you're just bringing like more attention to it. So I think you have to deflect it and be like, you can hurl all your insults you want, but at the end of the day, you're in charge of the economy right now and it's tanking. I think something like that's got to be the way to go about it. But you know, when you do start hurling sort of those personal attacks, you kind of lose your wits a little bit, and who knows, maybe it's a little personal, and maybe he'll get personal back.
As you said, JD Vance and Tim Walz are new on the national stage. JD Vance has only been a senator for a few years. Minnesota Governor Walz hasn't made national attention until the past 3 months, really. So, as we know, historically, vice presidential debates don't really matter. It's more about giving the nation a taste of who is this person, who's the number two on this ticket. But as we saw 3 months ago, when Biden dropped out of the race, the vice president became a lot more important, because in 48 hours, Harris was essentially the presumptive Democratic nominee. So how important is tonight, in your opinion?
I do think it'll be important, and I think maybe more important than it is traditionally. This is going to be a tight race already. We know those margins are very slim. Every little bit counts. Every coalition that's being targeted, every vote matters. And yes, I think that people are going to be tuning in. I mean, when we look at the presidential debate a few weeks ago, more people were tuning into that than they had for Monday Night Football, right? And so I think that this is an election where people are very intrigued by what's happening, especially, given the 2 assassination attempts of Trump. That Vice President Harris was essentially brought to the center stage a couple of months ago when Biden decided not to drop out and suspend his campaign. So I think people are going to be tuning in more so than normal. And you have to keep in mind right now, like with the hurricane from last week, North Carolina, a swing state, is very effective. How are we handling that response? When you see what's happening right now in the Middle East with Iran, like that's something that's going to sway voters probably too, who's going to be able to respond more strongly. So I think that every little bit counts and every inch matters here.
That's a really important point, because as of right now, in those 7 key battleground states, Trump and Harris are neck and neck. So do you think anything can happen on that stage tonight to move the needle either way in those states?
That's a really good question. And it's October now, so we don't know what that October surprise may be at this point. But I think being able to hit home on some of those issues that really affect folks in those states. So like when you talk about Pennsylvania, they care about energy and like production, right? Like that's something that perhaps Republicans have the upper hand on, in my opinion, because we're all of the above energy, right? And in North Carolina, like I said, if North Carolinians don't think that the response has been quick enough and it's a Democrat administration, perhaps that could be more votes to Republicans. We don't know here. I think time will tell. And certainly after tonight, I think we'll be able to see what that polling looks like and what they decide to target.
When you think about memorable moments from the last VP debates, it's rarely to do with policy. Just thinking back to 2020, it was either the fly on Mike Pence's head or Vice President Kamala Harris saying, "Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking." So tonight, if you were advising JD Vance going in there, would you tell him to focus on policy, or would you say, "Hey, appear more likable, be someone that someone grabs a beer with"? What's more important here? Or equal? Like, put a percentage on it.
Right. I think they're both incredibly important. I think at this point, maybe 40 policy, 60 personality, which it should be the other way around, right? Or it should be vastly more policy than personality. But at the end of the day, you can have the best policy in the world, and if you don't know how to talk about it, that's a problem. And I think that's the problem that he's encountering right now. So I think he needs to not lighten up, because this is a very serious situation, of course, but try to be his best self and put his best foot forward. He's supposedly an incredible orator, right? We have hillbilly elegy, so he's got to be careful, otherwise it'll be a hillbilly eulogy, and obviously he doesn't want that tonight.
He obviously doesn't want that, and if it were, in your words, a hillbilly eulogy, that would be a loss. But what do you think, or for him, so what do you think a win for JD Vance looks like?
I think if he's able to come across likably, I know we keep talking about how likable he needs to be, but if he's able to both do that and also talk about policy substantively, I think that's what he needs to do. I think that is the lethal cocktail that Vance needs to deliver to Mr. Walz here tonight in order to be successful in this. And I think he's got a lot riding in that, he is supposed to be this impressive orator and, give the facts and be really strong and firm. Those are the things that we already know about him, but can he do it on the national stage is what I guess we'll find out shortly enough.
And that is the big question. Can he do it on the national stage? Can Walz do it on the national stage? Who can do it better? And we will be breaking that down the rest of the week. But then, as we know, aside from that June debate between Biden and Trump, debates are often just a blip on the radar when it comes to the election season as a whole, and we are 5 weeks out. So what are you looking for with the polls being this tight between now and November 5th?
Well, this, as you mentioned at the beginning, this is our only vice presidential debate, and it's likely to be the last debate of the cycle anyway, because it doesn't look like there's going to be another one between Harris and Trump. And so people are going to be tuning in, paying attention to see what's being said, because otherwise these next 5 weeks are just going to catch, little rally clips here and there, and this is going to be the one-stop shop to get the biggest bang for your buck. And so what I am paying attention to is, do you have a plan? What is your plan? We saw on the presidential debate stage that they, of course you have plans, and it's not maybe the time and place to go into it very robustly, but there was also I have a plan, but I'm not going into it tonight, right? Or I have a blueprint for a plan, and that doesn't leave the most confidence in voters, I think. So if they're able to articulate their message, and I think what people are really looking for in addition to the policy is, and I don't mean to be an Obama term, but hope and optimism for the future. I think that's something that's sort of been missing the last couple of years, and I think that we can always move in a positive direction, and our brightest days are always ahead of us. So someone who can deliver that message.
That's a really good point. And to that point, it does feel, based on my conversations, based on polling, that Harris and Walz are that hope candidate. How do Trump and Vance become those hope candidates, those change makers in just those 5 weeks?
I think they have to be happy warriors. And I don't know if you can do that in 5 weeks and turn it around. But when you have, a former president who says that we're basically a third world country now, that America, everything about that we're doing is terrible. And listen, I understand the argument that he's trying to make is it was better under me, and look how bad things are now, right? But I wouldn't equate what's happening in the U.S. to what's happening in a third world country. I think that there's a better way to go about that and make the same point more eloquently. That's always been his biggest issue, I think, that we know that Trump is his Trump is Trump's biggest deterrent in all of this, and his biggest obstacle. And so if he's able to if they're both able to tweak that messaging and be the happy warriors that we need to move our country forward in a positive direction, then perhaps, but it's getting a little late in the game here.
Well, there is still, despite it being late in the game, there is still going to be a lot for us to discuss in the next 5 weeks. So I hope you come back on between now and Election Day and break it down with me. Brittany Martinez, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.